record. Where did it go?
You just hit record. You just didn't say anything.
Oh,
Is it recording?
I don't know.
It says
Oh,
stop
recording, yeah, okay.
Good. I
Okay,
turned the thing on. So I'm gonna surprise you with something real quick.
oh, okay.
So we've had in the Sermon on the Mount, there's the instruction to turn the other cheek. And, you know, we talked a lot about that and how hard it is. So this last week, I had an incident where somebody said something really, at least unkind. We'll let it go at that. But it was about my wife. It's about Mary. And of course I say, well, how do I turn the cheek on that? I mean, it's one thing if they say it about me, but it's another thing if they say it about my wife. And so I didn't turn the other cheek. And then today we're gonna get into the what is it?
No, nothing.
Oh, no. The thing about not judging others. And someone that I know made a comment online. Those of you who don't know, Ted Cruz, the senator, his daughter was rushed to the hospital with self-inflicted wounds. And this person actually said, well, I think Ted should have thought about that before he did some things. And I think, well, okay, don't judge, but how do I not judge that, right? How do I not judge that? And so I did. And, and the point is that this stuff is hard. And we find these excuses. What do you think the odds are? We're teaching in something that says to turn the other cheek and not to judge. And in the span of a week, I find 2 instances where I'm just pushed beyond my limit. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think I represented what we're studying very well, or any of you very well. And it's hard. So don't make any mistake. This is hard to do. And we have to pull it out of the box and turn it over and look at it if we're, to understand how and why. So I failed this week. That's all I just shared. So we can move on.
Okay, review. So this is the 5th week of the Sermon on the Mount. And just to remind you guys, Jesus was talking to disciples. He wasn't talking to the rich and the powerful, but he was talking to his followers. He was talking to hundreds of them, it seems. And this sermon, oftentimes we hear it from a church standpoint. We hear it just the Beatitudes. Well, now we've learned the Beatitudes was just his introduction. And the Sermon on the Mount was chapters 5, 6, and 7. And I was thinking about it this morning. I mean, and how this went with these little vignettes. These were probably not his entire sermon. It wasn't written word for word. This was probably, the top messages. So this went on for hours. I was telling Scott this morning, do you think like it was nonstop? Did you take breaks for lunch? But this went on for a long, long time. And it was amazing. It says at the very end of 7, which is after the Sermon on the Mount, because it's not his teaching, that his followers were amazed. But so today we're going to finish up with chapter 7, but we are going to do one of those, start from the back end of it. And I'm going to start from chapter 7, verse 24. And this was the last part of his sermon that is recorded. And it starts with, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the torrents raged, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the torrents raged, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its collapse. So there's that therefore, but this therefore is from 3 chapters, 5, 6, and 7. So, never when you're in church, when they read this, do you understand it's therefore the entire Sermon on the Mount in the first place. So
So this idea that the people who hear these words, what I've been teaching, and act on them are like a wise person that builds their house on rock. And when the storms come, they weather it. We did a study on Job one time, and Job always has, people always bring up, why do bad things happen to good people? And there are some lessons in Job. And we realize that if you try and tell somebody after the bad thing has happened, somebody who hasn't prepared for this, it sounds, if not trite, it certainly sounds like, how dare you tell me this? You don't understand what I'm going through. And right here in this, he talks about you people, those of you who hear these words and don't act on them, are like someone who builds a house on sand. And when the storms come, the house is washed away. And we see that a lot, but we also, we've kind of become convinced that weathering those storms has a lot to do with preparation. It has a lot to do with understanding these things beforehand, which is also one of the reasons we do this. And as we were studying this week, there's a point in the kind of the middle of this chapter where I said, well, that's really the high point. That's really the most important thing. And then I got down to this and I said, no, that's even more important than the other. This is an important, and I know it's at the end, but the idea of, if you hear my words and don't do anything with them, when the storms come, it's not very helpful. It's not something you pull out like you take an aspirin for a headache. This is something that you do along the way. So keep that in mind as we go through this.
So that therefore was for the entire teachings. Today, we're going to look at 5 different things. We're going to look at judging, prayer, the golden rule, the narrow gate, and bearing fruit. So I'm going to start now back at judging others. Do not judge, or you will be judged. For with the same judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but fail to notice the beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, while there's still a beam in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the beam out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before swine. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and then turn and tear you to pieces.
You want to admit, Naya?
I do want to admit that.
So this is one of those things that gets misused and abused and misunderstood a lot. And again, maybe it's best to start at the end, the last part of this, where he says, do not give dogs that which is holy. Do not throw your pearls before the swine. And people love to take this and go, you mean Jesus was calling people dogs and swine? No. And we're going to get to that, trust me. But if you read that part and you get caught up with people who want to condemn Jesus, that's not what this is. He starts out with don't judge. And don't judge or you'll be judged. There's another one that gets abused a whole lot. That means that if as long as you don't judge anybody, then God won't judge you. So everything is good. Everything is okay. Just don't talk about it. Don't have any, and then we're all good. And that's not what this says at all. That if you manage to be not judgy, everything you do is okay. God won't judge you. It's not that. Remember, first of all, who he's talking to. These are disciples. These are people who've begun to follow him. It says so in the beginning. We keep covering it. These people, at least some of them, are going to be the ones who carry the gospel, who carry his message to the rest of the world after he dies, after he's gone. And a lot of this is preparation for that. What happens if, say, a televangelist gets in trouble for doing some real horrible thing? Front page news. If somebody else does the same thing, it doesn't even get on the news. Why is that? Because too often, and we heard a sermon on this last night. We listened to one last thing last night, and this guy was saying that Pew Research and another research thing had done a kind of a poll, I guess, on what words come to mind when you talk about Christians. And it was judgmental. It was, I don't remember what the other two were. Judgmental is, it's like Family Feud. It's the one at the top of the list, is judgmental. And a lot of us, and I'll always try and include myself, a lot of us have tended to become that way. Over time, the church has put itself in that role of judging. And what happens is people say, well, if you're gonna come to me and say, you know what, you need to adjust this in your life, you need to stop doing this, I'm going to point out this thing that I caught you doing. I'm going to point out the 10 things that I've seen in you that I don't like. And it might occur to us that perhaps that's not our role to be doing that. And he goes on and talks about, you hypocrite, you're going to somebody else and wanting to pick a little speck out of their eye, and you've got a great big log in yours. I mean, in other words, you've got things in your life that you should probably be addressing before you go to the trouble of time. And that doesn't mean that everything is okay. I'll go back to the story, the woman that gets brought to Jesus. They want to sort of trap him. So they get a woman who was caught in the act of adultery, and they bring her and they say, the law says she should be stoned. What do you say? And he said he bent down and he's drawing in the sand, and they just keep going. It says, as they kept going, he finally stands up and says, well, okay, how about the one among you who's free of sin cast the first stone? That puts a different spin on it. And the one who cast the first stone, it's a whole other subject. But the point is, if you think you're without,
so they walked away.
You're without sin,
yeah.
Be the first one to throw a stone at this woman. And they begin to drift off. It says the older ones begin to drift off first. Maybe they had more time to count what they've done. But eventually they all just leave, because nobody's going to stand up to that challenge. And so he turns to the woman and he says, is there nobody here to accuse you? And she says, well, no, I guess not. There's nobody. He says, well, then neither do I condemn, and that's actually condemn. Neither do I condemn you. But then here's the piece that gets left out of this episode most often. He tells her, go and sin no more. Knock it off. He didn't tell her what she's been doing is okay. I'm not going to condemn you. But go and sin no more. Stop it. And so we see in this thing about not judging, what gets done with it a lot. And that's one of them, is that this is supposedly means if we're not here to be judging people, then it means everything that anybody ever does is an okay thing to do. It doesn't mean that. And Jesus' words to that woman, neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more, sort of bear that out. But our job is not to condemn. And you're going to see that in the next section. We've already done it. Do you want to talk any about the pearls and the swine, or just me?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So right behind that, right on the heels of this, the next sentence, we get this instruction about don't give dogs what is holy, and don't cast your pearls before the swine. And again, as I mentioned, people take this and say, well, he's calling people pigs and he's calling people dogs, and that's not the point. What do pigs care about? Mostly, food. Give me eat. Give me something to eat. And if pearls don't interest them at all, pearls interest us. They were very, very valuable in this time. None of the people in his audience would have likely had pearls. Probably none of them. So this clearly is not a literal reference to pearls. It's not a literal reference to pigs either. They don't value pearls, and they'll just tromp them into the mud, trample them underfoot. Dogs, you scratch behind the ear and some food, and that's what's valuable to them. And if you go to people, and it's hand in hand with judging, you go to people who don't value, and your disciples, your followers, you try and go to people who don't value what you're talking about, and they're not very likely to respond. You're telling me something I don't care about. And he's not saying don't talk to them, but as I said, it goes hand in hand with judgment. That's the reason it's the next sentence, is he says that you are going to be taking this message to people, but your job is not to condemn them. Your job is not to point out everything that they do that displeases God, because they don't believe in that. You're going to have to go about this a different way. And it's important. That's why I kept coming back to who he's talking to.
So all evangelism is not effective, and it's not always our role. It's not that you can't speak the truth of your belief, but sometimes doing it in a certain way, or talking to certain people that are not going to.
And also, it's the reason why I opened up with my confessions for the week, because I wanted to ask, what do you think would be more effective? Telling someone, you need to turn the other cheek, or actually demonstrating that such a thing is possible, actually doing it, and people go, wow, I really expected to provoke you with that, and to not do it. Which one of those, just saying, God says, turn the other cheek. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And you go, I don't, what Pilate, when he says, what is truth? What do I care about truth, right? You can't take somebody a message that they don't yet care about. The Spirit changes hearts. As their hearts are changed and they hear you and or they see you maybe turn the other cheek, or not be judging all the time, maybe the Spirit has a better chance of reaching them, and suddenly this might be important to them. But we as the church, the global, have sort of lost our way on this piece so much. The idea of us, make no mistake, I am not saying everything is okay, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't discern, but the way we approach other people who don't yet understand this makes a difference. And that's who he's talking to.
What is the concept of judgment in the Old Testament?
Well,
because the ball is changing right now, the Sermon on the Mount. So what is he talking to these followers, the disciples, about? Do not judge. What are they hearing?
Condemn.
It's an interesting thing, and I believe, and I can't prove it through the words that are here, but when he said, I'll get you, Virginia, or you want to answer? Go ahead and answer.
Well, I can't, I know in my Bible, I made a reference, because I studied this once, but they're in John. I don't know if it's not in the same sermon or anything on the Mount, but he's talking to people who are judging him for healing on the Sabbath. This is his word. And at the end, he says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So I take that as we're supposed to make sure that our judgment, or maybe our opinion or our discernment on something is right. Righteous to me is, it better be right. So before I open my mouth, I better make sure I'm right. Like, I don't know, the context of what you were talking about with that, sort of maybe correcting somebody who says something ugly.
Well, part of this is, if you notice, what he's talking about is in the context of people. And when I started this with the televangelists, we get judged. If it says, actually, it says, and we didn't emphasize this, but by the same measure you judge others, you're going to be judged. Okay, does that mean that God is going to, right is right and wrong is wrong? If we understand God's nature, that there is sin, there are things that are not acceptable, and there are things that are, that's not going to change whether you get judgy or not. You're going to be judged by the same measure as all the rest of us. What does change is the way the rest of the people that you deal with. I think, based in all the context, that he is preparing them to go out, and he's telling them, you're going to get judged by the same measure you use to weigh and balance other people. And there are two, as I say, there are two different kingdoms at play, but there's what we do here and there's what comes after. In this case, the best fit I see is that if we get known as people who are constantly weighing and measuring and condemning other people, it's a detriment to us being able to spread the gospel to other people. Wouldn't you say? If the first word that comes to mind when people hear the word Christian is judgmental, that's probably, not going to serve us well. And if you notice, when he talks about throwing the holy things before the swine and the dogs, he says there's a chance that they'll even turn and attack you and rend you, tear you to pieces. We see that happening in this world, and I've kind of been leading up to, things are going to get worse before they get better. There's a town yesterday I saw that said that Christian organizations cannot sponsor anything in the parade. We'll allow just about anybody else to, but not you. And some of this, unfortunately, I think we've earned. I think we've brought on ourselves doing some of this. Yes, you tell people that there is something else available. There's a life that doesn't involve doing these things. But what you see in this, don't judge, lest you be judged by whom. I don't believe he's saying that if you don't judge people, God will just say everything you did was fine. That's not how things, and while he does, and you'd say things are changing, because not being judged involves this atonement that he's about to provide to us through his sacrifice, through his death, through his resurrection. And so you don't want to conflate these two. You don't want to let anybody else convince you that he's saying, well, a quick way to get into God's graces, to get into heaven, is just don't be judgy. That's not this. He's teaching people, when you go out, when you begin to do this, your job is not to take on the role of judge.
The way I look at it, you
When I
can,
read that first sentence, do not judge. If I read it literally, there's no change at all. And those people would have known, don't go against the Romans, don't go against the hierarchy. They would have known that. That sentence literal doesn't add the heavenly judgment. It's not even talking about that.
I agree.
Possibly. I don't know what it's talking about. To me, if I read it literally, it's a nice sentence, but it doesn't bring anything to the table at the Sermon of the Mount.
Well,
and I think it goes back to, all of this as we go on, it's about how we interact with one another. And I think they hear judgment was to condemn people. And, Jesus, God does not condemn us because he had his son die for us. We are not condemned. That doesn't mean there isn't right and wrong and that we're not supposed to try for that. And as we go on to this next section on prayer, once again, he is talking about our interaction with other people. And if we are going to spread the word and let people know that there's a life out there that's better than this, and a life here that can be better than this, doesn't mean that we don't have a strong belief system on what is right or wrong, but it's not our job to condemn.
yeah. Who gets to judge in court? You're an attorney. You don't get to. There's one judge, and you make your case, but you're not the judge. And it's similar, but let's move down because this is going to tie in. Rarely are these things isolated. Let's go on, and it's gonna
I'm just gonna
kind
take
of,
it
I
to
think,
11.
huh?
I'm just gonna take it to 11. This next section is on, we know it as ask, seek, and knock, and it's about prayer. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, you will give him a snake? So if you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him?
Ask and it'll be given unto you. And there's the what did the guy call it last night? The
Oh, it was a great thing. Okay, yeah. A
Anyway.
blank check.
blank check
Yeah.
doctrine. Yeah. Ask and it will be given unto you. Seek and you will find. And again, you can never take these things in isolation. That's not consistent with everything else that Jesus taught. Over.
And the sermon we listened to gave this gentleman, he does a Bible project. His name is Tim Mackle, if you ever want to listen to any of his things, but he gives some great analogies, and he's a young father of a 3-year-old, I think he said. And he said, think of who he's speaking to. He's speaking to Jews that and Gentiles, but people that were brought in a very, God was a very stern person in their teaching. And he is teaching them about the love of God. And he's giving them the example of a father and a son. And this gentleman
child. Could be a girl too.
It could be a girl too. The example, but Tim Mackle last night was talking about him and his 3-year-old son. He says, for me to get a minute by myself, I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he says, here comes my 3-year-old son, hair wild, and he sits next to me. And he says, and I'm just loving it. He says, I don't know how long it'll last, but for 2 weeks it's been happening. I said, good morning. I think his name is Roman. Good morning, Roman. And he says, chocolate milk, hot chocolate. Will you give me hot chocolate? And he says, I immediately say yes. And he says, read me a book. And I immediately read him a book. And he says, that is the image that Jesus was giving these people in the Sermon on the Mount, that this is a God who is so loving and is so excited about making hot chocolate and reading a book. And he says, but he wasn't saying that I am going to give my son a lollipop for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He said that would be stupid. And
there is within this Jewish teaching a lot of the time that you say one thing and the converse is understood. So if a child asks a parent for a loaf of bread, who would give them a snake, or a fish, who would give them a snake? But the converse is if the child asks for a snake, the answer is no. Right? Dad, can I have a flamethrower?
That's always his example growing up with the kids.
But growing up, I saved, money that I had earned, and they let me go buy sulfur and potassium nitrate and I'm making gunpowder, right? The answer should have been no. No, you're not buying that. No, you're not making gunpowder. No, you can't, it's hard to make gunpowder that really goes boom, it burns. But the point is I was doing that, and the answer probably should have been no. I always taught our kids, I'm going to be looking for a way to say yes to you, right? So if I say no, it's because I just couldn't come up with a reason I could say yes to this. And that's sort of what's being described here. He's using the example of a parent. And we love our children, and make no mistake. I've told you before, I taught something similar to this, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she was irate because she had a really bad father. Nothing is universal. People don't relate to every example, but you should at least look at this and go, this is the idea of what a parent should be. And hopefully, we are to a great extent. You're going to give your child good things. And you're not going to deliver up bad things to them. the trick sometimes to this is understanding that we don't always know what's good for us. I cannot count the number of times throughout my life that I've been moved in a direction, and what was at the end of that road was far better than I ever would have dreamed up for myself. I would have never dared to ask for that because I thought, that's too much to ask. We get led in careers. It happens. And so he's explaining to them that God loves you. And like a parent looks to bring good things to you and looks to not bring things that will harm you. And then the next verse, or you got something else to say?
No, I was going to read the next part all the way through the narrow gate. Is that okay?
No.
Okay, just want to do that one. Okay. If in everything then, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the essence of the law and the prophets.
That's sort of an important piece. It's two little sentences. He says, in everything then, that's a therefore. The then is just like saying therefore in everything. Well, the therefore always has to do with what came before. And what he's just explained is God gives us good things. If we seek, by the way, I didn't mention that, seek and you will find. People don't like to talk about that. They love to talk about ask and you'll receive. They don't talk about seek and you will find. What might you be seeking? That requires a little bit of thought. And he's just gotten done saying, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Seek that, you'll find it. I don't think the two things are unrelated here in the middle of this big sermon. Seek and you will find. Seek first the kingdom of God. There's a lesson there. Learn it, right? So when he goes through this and he explains that God is good to us, therefore, in all things, do to others as you would have them do unto you. It's related. The therefore is sort of a clue. And he's telling us we're supposed to bestow the same grace, the same goodness that we receive from God, that do to other people what you would have them do unto you. Well, that's easy. But then comes something that I think is especially important that I've never heard mentioned anywhere. So that you're getting an exclusive. But look at what he says. Do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the essence of the law and the prophets. The essence of the law, not the 10 commandments and the 613 mitzvahot and the limitless midrash rules. This is the essence. And what's more important, the letter of the law or the essence of the law? So what's the essence of the law? To do to others as you would have them do to you. Now, I want to go back and remind you that just a few paragraphs, as if they were done in paragraphs, but just a short time before this, he's told them, I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. Now here he is, just a few paragraphs later saying, this is the essence of the law and the prophets.
It's not all those rules.
It's not all the rules. It's not the 613, don't mix cotton and flax in one garment kind of rules. This is the essence of the law and the prophets. Do to others as you would have them do unto you. And I didn't come to get rid of the law and the prophets because this never goes away. This is the contiguous message that goes on in this Sermon on the Mount. It's not unrelated that I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill it. To fulfill what? To love others, to do unto others as I would have them do unto me. He fulfills that. This is designed to get us away from the rules and the legalism that we try to impose, because this is too hard.
We had an interesting insight in a sermon we listened to that this concept was out there, but from the negative.
That a lot of religions have something
Yeah.
that people equate to the golden rule.
Yeah, but instead it's always written don't do,
Don't do anything bad to somebody. Yeah. if
so they won't do anything bad to you. And so they, in fact, that there was a Jewish rabbi, there was a rabbi about a couple of decades earlier than this, who was asked about all the laws, and he said, and basically he did it in the negative sense. Don't do bad to others so they won't do bad to you. And Jesus is saying, once again, he's turning everything upside down. He says, it's not that, it's the positive side, which is a lot harder. Yeah.
a lot more expansive, a lot more inclusive. They have doctors, what's one of the things they say before all, Charlie, you could tell me that, do no harm, right? Before all else, do no harm. And that's it's a good thing, but he's not saying just don't harm people. He's saying treat them the way you want to be treated. What's one of the things that people can't stand? They don't want to be ignored. It's one thing to say, well, I didn't harm them, I just didn't pay any attention to them. They're just not important to me. That's not how we want to be treated. That's not how, and so there is a big difference between this do no harm concept and treat other people the way you yourself want to be treated. And he exemplifies that. He lives it. He fulfills the essence of the law. If you remember the rich man who came to him and said, what do I have to do to see the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven? And he says, well, what do you think? What's the most important? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. He says, oh, you said, well, that's a good thing. Now, go sell all the stuff you've got and come follow me. You got it. He knew the guy didn't have it. The guy was not going to let go. But this idea of, we're told several times through the New Testament, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the essence of the law. Anything that gets done through legalism that doesn't do that, you've missed. You've missed the boat. You're off target. Don't do that. And as Mary said, and it was a good point, saying don't go hurt anybody is not nearly the same as saying treat other people the way you want to be treated.
Isn't that one of the fundamental changes of the first 5 commandments and the second 5 commandments? Ones are positive, the other ones are negative.
The
very first one is all positive.
I have, as one of my favorite writers said, I have spent countless nights in the student union debating that. I have seen lots of stuff about that. And what I can tell you, I don't think I can answer your question, but what I can tell you is Jesus always comes back and says, get this right, and the rest of that will take care of yourself. Love, treat people, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, pretty much assumes that you're not going to kill them. Wouldn't you? I mean, you think we can go with that. And so get this one right. The others take care of themselves. They needed those specifics as sort of, that was an early groundwork that says, you guys, we got to find a way to play together nicely. And this is important, but ultimately this is the law. This is the essence.
Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the way that leads to life, and only a few find it.
Go ahead. You want to link? Our Bibles like to put headings in, and we have chapter and verse markings. Those didn't exist. It is convenient sometimes when they group things for us, but deciding which thing gets grouped with which other thing is sometimes a little more difficult. Mary likes the idea that this is linked to the previous one about, so go ahead, say what you think.
Well, the first thing of do unto others, the golden rule, that we heard one person that actually started with verse 12, went all the way through verse 14, linking those together. And that this is not an easy teaching to do unto others as you would have do unto you. I mean, it's the golden rule and it sounds good, but it is a really hard teaching. And it's part of this narrow gate, that this idea that all these teachings that Jesus has been giving, they're difficult. And to just write it off that it is not difficult is too easy. And so, and it can only be done since we have a sense in us to be selfish and not to do these things. We can only do this with the help of the Holy Spirit. And it's not one and done. It is part of the Christian walk.
It is a growth. It is a thing. And there's actually, they didn't print. I have the verse, but there are places where it indicates that this is a thing that we grow towards. It's not as instant as we would like it to be.
It also says that this section of the narrow gates, it is something that the religious world, and I'm not talking about Christianity, other religions, but also Christians don't like these couple of verses. And it's because it says, isn't there more than one way to heaven? Isn't there one more way to God? And I believe the challenge there is Jesus says there's one way. And what that means, it's above our pay grade, but this is what it says. And
He does say that small is the gate and narrow the way that leads to life. Somebody Mary listened to, I think, came up with, well, is that life here, or is that heaven? Is that,
the answer is yes.
They're
both.
related, but small is the gate and narrow the way that leads to life. And remember when we did John, he says, in him was light, life, and that life was the light of the world. That's the life we're talking about. And so the idea that the gate is small and the way is narrow, and not many pass through it. We can get locked down in this argument about whether this person or this group of people are going through the narrow gate and the small gate and the narrow path. I think it's a whole lot more profitable, and you can go back to the judging. It's not my job to judge. I try hard to stay away from that. But what he does say is, there's an implied when you tell the kids shut the door, you're really saying you shut the door, right? Enter through the narrow gate. You enter through the narrow gate. This I take as an instruction to me, and my urging would be that each of you take it as an instruction to you. And rather than try and figure out who else is going to get through the gate, make sure that you do. And that solves a whole lot of the problems that we have to deal with in this walk.
But isn't the price of entrance is the belief?
Absolutely. I make no
So
bones.
once you do that, that's a heavy order. I mean, that's hard to comply with every single day in this.
If we have to earn it, we're lost. I am, and I'll let you decide if you can figure a way to earn it or not. But I know that no matter how I try, I can't earn it. And yet we have this obligation. Part of our obligation is to bring this same good news to other people. And how do we do that effectively? You see how this is all related? He starts out with this idea of don't judge, or other people are going to judge you. And it's because he's preparing people to do just that, to bring this same word.
A challenge out there is when you've heard conversations, so do you believe in God? And someone will say, yes. Do you believe in heaven? Yes, I believe in heaven. Are you going to heaven? And someone will say, well, I really hope so. And they said, what is that based on? They say, I'm a pretty good person. And, hopefully through these studies, you understand it's not about being a pretty good person. None of us can be good enough. It's about believing that Jesus Christ died for our sins.
And what happens when you say that? When we say that, I say that, you say, somebody inevitably is going to jump up and say, well, what about the ancient Mayans? I don't know. Okay. I don't know. I'm not given that instruction, and perhaps I wasn't given that instruction because it's not my job, right? I know what I'm told, and he says, I'm the way, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life to follow. That's the cost of being a disciple. And what about the Jews? They have a covenant with God. They have a special deal, right? So it seems. Well, what is that? I don't know. I wasn't given that instruction. We struggle with that as humans. I want to know the whole story. I want to know all of this other stuff. Well, I can't help
And
you there.
he's better with us just in life. It'll be funny. He'll meet somebody and I'll always want to know the rest of it. So are they married? Do they have kids? Where do they work? And so I really struggle with this. I want to know the whole picture. He's able to say, I don't know, Mary, I just talked to them.
3 minutes in the checkout line at HEB and she knows their life history.
So I really struggle with knowing the whole picture.
But the point to all this is an instruction. This is the best record we have of an instruction from Jesus, the one we know as the Christ. That's the root of Christianity. And if you want to do that, then learn what's there, learn, what's being taught.
Okay. Beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Well, there's a good ending.
Yeah,
huh?
so here's another one of these, though. He says, beware of false prophets. This is good advice right now today. It's everywhere. And I see people, politicians, get up and they've got some law or regulation, and they say, if Jesus were here, he would vote for this. First of all, I don't think based on the content that he would. And second of all, that's not up to you. But false prophets are in churches everywhere. And they are, I like to come back to televangelists because it's easy. We can just pick on them at will. But the ones that are, wearing the $5,000 suits and the $500 haircuts, and you got to figure there's a problem there. That's not what we're taught. But they also come up with instructions and things that are not consistent. So we can understand, beware false prophets, and you'll know them. Don't kid yourself. Deep down, you know them. You see the fruit. You see the results of what they're doing. You know who they are. Beware of them. But you get further down, and he says, the bit about the good fruit, the bad fruit, we get it. But he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will see the kingdom of heaven. And we lose a lot of people. Nobody wants to hear the words that somebody's not going to see the kingdom of heaven, right? Well, I'm sorry. You can choose to say, I don't think he knows what he's talking about, but I can tell you what's there. And that's what he says. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will see the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Well, that sounds like we got to follow all the rules. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I got to do the will, and keep with it, though. Stick with me. We're almost done. But he says, many will say to me on that day, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and drive out demons and do all this stuff in your name? Wait a minute. Hey, you remember me? I did all this stuff for you. And he says, obviously, he's saying these people are going to be rejected. So why? And what he says is, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. And I dug into this lawlessness thing to be sure I'm getting, the essence of what's there. But remember, we just got done talking about the essence of the law and the prophets, right? What's the essence of the law and the prophets? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Do to others what you would have them do to you. And he says the words, this is the essence of the law. So if you're lawless, if he says, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness, it's people who rejected that part. They thought that their job is to sit in judgment and to do all these other things. And he says, no, the essence of the law was always love the Lord with all your heart and soul and love your neighbor as yourself. Lawlessness would be abandoning that. That's lawlessness. The rest of the stuff that people sort of piled on top of that is not the essence of the law and prophets. And he includes all of that in this Sermon on the Mount. He ties it all together. He comes down and says, there are people who will say, man, I had a TV show where I said your name a lot. And he said, you were doing your thing and not loving your neighbor, not doing to others what you would have them do unto you. You piled up, and this is not an indictment of people who have money, but some of these people get pretty carried away and they're leading churches, and there are people who really need some help and we don't help them. As Jesus said one time about the Pharisees, he told people, do what they say, don't do what they do. They put up hurdles in front of people. They put up stumbling blocks and they don't do anything to help them get over them. That's the essence of the law and the prophets. And V, you have something to add, don't you?
Oh, my mind is going.
Contemplative, all right.
Well, one thing I was wondering, are there still evangelists on TV? I don't watch TV. Are they still out there doing that?
Little Joel and he can.
Oh,
Yeah, they're
You know where I see it happening though, is I think people, maybe it's just the world I'm in right now, but more people are listening to politicians and policy.
Well-
And they're going the same way. They're falling into their side or their side. And this week, it was just so cool, I'm praying and thinking and sharing with some friends, prayer partners and stuff. And it occurred to me that the other side, I'm not telling you what side I'm on, but the other side could read the solutions that they're hearing and seeing the same way I'm reading it, but it applies to their politician. Because we're not supposed to look at people, narrow is the way, narrow is the gate. And a lot of people are scared right now because things have changed so fast in so many realms culturally. Things have changed that we all see it and we're all experiencing it. And so here we are all together, the left side, the right side, or whatever, this side or that side, we're all together. And I was encouraging my friends because I think our job is to encourage and to start with us, start with the body, encourage us that, to keep looking that way and not to think that our solution's going to come from a politician.
we
or the next
tended we got to a point in the 60s, maybe in the peak of it, that the more people in the church, the better. And it doesn't matter if they believe anything, it doesn't matter. I actually had an elder in a church tell me one time, I don't believe any of this. Don't bother me with that. And he's one of the leaders in the church. And we sort of collectively accepted that idea. We are going into a time where more and more people are saying, you know what, you guys are hypocrites. And so we don't want anything to do with that. And there's there are a lot of things in the scriptures that actually talk about this. I've always, not always, but long believed that Christianity by and large is practiced one-on-one, that it's very difficult to you'd really speak to a mass of people you don't get to know any of them. You don't have an opportunity to do to individuals what you would have done to yourself. We get the opportunities to touch people, to be a part of them, but that's one-on-one, or certainly, one on just a small group. And this is what he's teaching them. This is what this whole thing, he's preparing them to go out and do that. And you look at it and he says, a lot of people at some point will say, I did all this stuff for you. And what we get from the end of this is he says, the important thing, the essence of the law and the prophets is to do to others as you would have them do to you. So my final thing, and I'm out of time, so I'm going to go over just a little bit, is how is such a thing possible? How is it possible to do to other people, to do for other people what you would have them do to you, how you would have them treat you? Don't ignore the people. The woman who cleans the room in the motel becomes part of the furniture. People have conversations in front of them because they don't even see them as being humans. And I believe ultimately what ties all this together is, with man, it's impossible. There's another one of our good quotes. How is such a thing possible? Because with man, it's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. The only way that we reach this point of really treating other people the way is through this relationship with God, through this atoning reconciliation that Jesus is about to bring in just a few chapters. And that's what ties it all together. This is the life that we strive for, and this is the path that lets us get to it. I'm sorry, I talked a lot.
No. Just that next week we're going to do some Christian Christmas carols. We're going to explore where they came from. We're going to do just a 1 week of that. And then Christmas this year is on Sunday and New Year's is on Sunday. So we're going to actually take a 2-week break, and next week we'll announce what we're going to do starting the January 7th.
We're going to record something though for me.
Oh, yes. Oh, we're going to, and then we are going to do a Christmas Eve, and we will tell you when we're going to do it live, but we know that Christmas Eve is on Saturday. So we'll tell you if it's going to be at 4 or 5, but we'll record it for you guys so you can see it anytime too. Does that sound good? Sorry, I forgot that.
You gonna sing those carols?
Yeah, no. Sorry. That's for both of us. It's a no.
And I'm gonna forgive you for saying that. I'm not gonna judge what your intent was.